All right, welcome. Today we are diving into something huge, 5,000 years of Chinese history. And we're going to boil it all down into this powerful story of collapse, rebirth, and how a modern superpower was made.
So here's the big question, right? How does that happen? This is the journey we're going on today. It's a story that's all about these repeating cycles, incredible innovation, and some seriously radical transformation.
To make sense of this massive story, we've got a roadmap. First, we'll look at the mandate of heaven, this core idea that ran everything. Then, we'll see how the empire was forged. After that, we'll explore the cycles of invasion and rebirth. We'll cover the fall of the very last dynasty, and finally bring it all into the modern age with the People's Republic.
Okay, so to really get China, you've got to start with this one single idea. It's a concept so powerful that it decided who got to be emperor and for how long. For 3,000 years.
Now, this wasn't just some blank check for absolute power. The deal was, if a ruler got corrupt, or things went bad, famine, floods, disaster, it was seen as a sign from the heavens that they'd lost the mandate, and that created the perfect justification for a rebellion and for a new dynasty to take over. And that, right there, is the engine that drives Chinese history. We call it the dynastic cycle.
And man, this cycle goes way, way back. We're talking about dynasties that were around at the same time as ancient Egypt. The Shang dynasty gives us the first actual historical records we can point to. But it was the Zhao who came up with this whole mandate of heaven idea, the political philosophy that would define China for millennia.
So what this tells us is that right from the get-go, this was a civilization of unbelievable innovation. The first Chinese writing was literally carved into bone. Their bronze work was second to none. And, maybe most importantly, this is the era when thinkers like Confucius show up, creating the philosophical bedrock that Chinese society is still built on today.
All right, so after all that philosophical discovery, you had centuries of, chaos. It was called the Warring States period for a reason. And out of that chaos, one man steps up to end the fighting and forge something totally new, the Chinese Empire. You really can't overstate what a massive shift this was. Just imagine, China goes from hundreds of years of non-stop, brutal warfare between all these different kingdoms to suddenly being a single, unified, and ruthlessly efficient empire under the control of one guy.
And that guy was Qin Shi Huang, China's very first emperor. And listen, he didn't just conquer his rivals, he had to literally bind the empire together. It wasn't enough to just win the battles. He standardized everything: money, writing, even the width of cart axles on the roads. He was famously brutal, no doubt about it, but his actions created the blueprint for imperial China.
Then came the Han Dynasty. And if the Chen were the architects who drew up the brutal blueprints, you can think of the Han as the master builders, who made the whole thing last. They're the ones who established the legendary Silk Road, connecting China to the West. And get this, they created a professional government of administrators chosen by merit through exams, a system that would last for centuries.
And this pattern, this cycle of golden ages, just keeps going. The Tang Dynasty, it's seen as its incredible high point for culture. We're talking amazing poetry and art. And that period of innovation leads right into the Song Dynasty, which saw the invention of things like gunpowder and movable type printing, hundreds of years before they ever showed up in Europe.
But remember that mandate of heaven? It's a cycle. And what goes up? Well, you know the rest. The strength of the empire was constantly being tested, both by corruption from the inside and by invaders from the outside.
So at its peak, the Song Dynasty was probably the most advanced civilization on the entire planet. It had a massive economy, huge bustling cities, amazing technology. But all that cultural brilliance, it didn't really translate to military power. And that weakness, it turned out to be a fatal flaw.
And then, everything changes. From the steppes up north come the Mongols. In what has to be one of the most dramatic invasions in all of history, Kublai Khan and his Mongol hordes just sweep through and conquer all of China. They established their own dynasty, and for the very first time, the entire empire was under foreign rule.
But the cycle turns again. After almost 100 years of Mongol rule, a peasant rebellion kicks them out, and the Ming dynasty is born. This was a huge moment of national reclamation. It basically proved that even after being completely swallowed by invaders, Chinese civilization could absorb them and then re-emerge, maybe even stronger. All right, let's jump forward now to the final chapter of Imperial China. After the Ming, another group of invaders from the north, the Manchu, took over and established the Qing dynasty. They would rule for nearly 300 years, but they were about to face a challenge that no dynasty before them had ever seen: the industrial powers of the West.
And the old playbook? It just wasn't going to work this time. The Qing dynasty was dealing with rebellions at home, and these technologically superior foreign powers knocking at their door, and the whole system just crumbled. This period is known in China as the Century of Humiliation, where foreign powers basically carved up the country. It was the end of 2,000 years of imperial rule, and it set the stage for a revolution.
So, the empire is gone. And what replaces it? Decades of civil war and total chaos. This all culminates in 1949, with the Communist Party winning and Chairman Mao announcing the birth of a brand new, revolutionary China.
You can really think of modern China's story in two major acts. First, you have Mao Zedong's ideological revolution, this intense period of communist doctrine and class struggle. But then, after he died, you get Deng Xiaoping's economic revolution, which basically threw out the rigid rulebook and went with practical, market-based reforms.
And the results of Deng's reforms? I mean, they were absolutely mind-blowing. China went through the single most explosive period of economic growth in human history. We're talking about lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty at a speed the world had never, ever seen. For 3 decades straight, the economy grew by an average of over 10% a year. Just incredible. And this one famous quote from Deng really sums up the whole philosophy. It doesn't matter if a cat is black or white, so long as it catches mice. The focus wasn't on pure communist ideology anymore. It was about what worked. And it was that pragmatism that created the economic superpower we all see today.
Which brings us full circle, right back to this idea of a mandate. Okay, so the old dynastic cycle is over. But that question of legitimacy, the right to rule, it's still there. For thousands of years, the mandate was about divine right and keeping order. So what is it today? Is it delivering economic prosperity? Is it projecting national strength? Is it global leadership? That right there is the question that's going to define China's next chapter. And maybe the rest of the world too.